Hey guys, welcome to the shop. Today, I'd like to introduce you to one of my new friends. What's this thing? Yeah, okay, let's talk about that. That's a tapering jig. What does it do? What's it for? Well, today we're going to talk about that. And if you have any questions on any of the materials that I use or the parts or hardware, just check the link in the comments below and you'll be able to see all of that stuff for yourself. So a taper can be cut in a number of different ways using a lot of different tools. But a problem that we run into often, especially when making things like table legs or chair legs, is that we want to have a very, very thin taper along a long edge. Along a long edge? That sounds weird. You know what I mean. So you can just draw a line and you can try to use something like your table saw guide that might have an angle guide there and try to almost freehand that line, and who knows, sometimes you might get it. The problem is if you have to repeat that cut multiple times, it can be very difficult to freehand that. So enter the jig. This allows us to make repeatable cuts that are not only incredibly safe, which is very important, but can be adjusted to almost any angle. All right, well, enough chit chat. I'm sure you guys want to get into it, so let's go see how this thing is made. So for this project, we're going to be using a scrap piece of 3/4 inch plywood. We're going to use a piece of hardwood that is been cut to fit in the track of my table saw. We're going to use 2 star knobs, 2 1.5" T-bolts, 4 5/8 inch wood screws, and 2 ROCKLER hold down clamps with their assorted hardware. So let's get to it. So the first thing you want to do is take your scrap piece of hardwood. I use some red oak that I had lying around, and you want to cut a piece to fit into the track of your table saw. Now you can go ahead and buy these prefabricated tracks. They're usually some kind of extruded aluminum, and they work really well. But I figured I'd save myself a couple bucks and just make one real quick. Luckily, I actually had a piece left over from a previous project, so I have one here that fits pretty snugly in the track, but has just enough room to move around. And once I had that established, I just went ahead and cut it down to the same size as the table saw, and you're ready to go on to step 2. So now we're going to go ahead and make the base of the jig. Now this part is a little arbitrary. It depends on what you really want to do with it. So you kind of have to think a little bit in the future and imagine how big of a piece you're going to be cutting. You don't want to limit yourself and make a jig that's too small that you then have to remake in the future, but you also don't need something that is massive and going to take 2 people to run through your table saw. So with that in mind, I decided to go ahead and make the dimensions of my base about 20 by 28. So let's go ahead and rip that down. So you guys probably noticed that in that last section I did cut an additional 2 pieces here, and these are about 4 inches wide by 28 inches long, but we'll use them in another section. For now, let's focus back on the base. We want to try and attach this hardwood track onto our base. So before we do that, keep in mind that when we attach this, we are going to run this back through the blade to establish a 0 clearance line here. So when you line this up, make sure that this edge is beyond the blade. It doesn't matter if it's a 1/4 inch or an inch, just make sure that it's past the blade. So find a spot that looks good there, and you're going to take a measurement from the edge roughly to where your track starts. So I'm at about 5 inches here, and I'll take the same measurement at the bottom, and now just add about half the width of your track here, which is about 3/4. So we're going to go back to 5 3/8, 5 3/8, And now strike a line on those 2 points, and now you have a center line to drill holes and to screw the track into the bottom of the base. So let's do that next. This side that we were working on becomes the bottom, and we can flip this over, line it up in the track, and it should slide pretty smoothly. So now we can go ahead and raise the saw and cut a line that is perfectly parallel to the saw blade, so that we know that from now on that line is going to be your guide for the cut that you want to make. Now that we had the base all ready to go, I went ahead and removed the track on the bottom, and what we're going to do is use the router to cut a groove that will allow our T-nuts, or T-bolts I should say, to slide through here. So this consists of a 2-part groove. You need one that is big enough to hold the head, and then one that is just a little bit bigger than the threaded part of the bolt itself. So we're going to start with this bit. We're going to make a shallow pass all along the top here, and then we're going to go all the way through with a much thinner bit, and that should allow us to give some room for the T-bolt and allow it to move without falling out. Now while I have the router out, I'm also going to do the same thing to these 2 extra pieces. We're going to run a line down the center, we're going to do a shallow pass with the wider bit, and then we're going to go all the way through with the narrower bit. Alright, so after all that routing, we've got the spaces on the base, and these extra pieces here have the same exact grooves cut into them to allow for the T-bolts. So the next thing we're going to do is reattach the track, and this time we're going to glue it down. And just a little bit of glue is all you need. You want to make sure that the screws here are below the surface, because otherwise you run the risk of them hitting your table saw, and then this won't slide very smoothly. Okay. And while we have this here flipped upside down, the last thing I'm going to do is just take some paste wax and spread some all along the bottom surface here. And that's just going to really help make this a frictionless surface and help it to glide along the table saw without any resistance. Okay. So that should slide pretty easily now. Let's test it out. Yeah, that just glides right across, and that's exactly what you want. All right, and now we can go ahead and get this bad boy assembled. So the first thing we're gonna do is set up these clamps here. So you're gonna run one of the toggle bolts through, slide the clamp on top, washer, and star knob. Let's get it right this time. Do the same for the other one. All right, and now this whole assembly gets attached to the main base in the same way. Note to self, I probably should have gotten longer T-bolts for this section, but they'll work for now. Do the same along the back. And voila, you've got yourself a tapering jig. Now you're probably wondering what this second piece is for all along. Well, not only is it a spare in case something happens to this one, because let's face it, I'm probably gonna break this at some point in time. But when you do have to cut material that is taller, it does help to line this underneath. So you would have to, obviously I would have to get longer bolts here, but I would slip this underneath and reassemble everything in the same way. But now I have a taller bearing surface if I have a larger piece that needs to get cut. So that you can just keep aside for the time being, and for now we'll just focus on this one, but hey, at least you have a spare. Okay, so now the part you've all been waiting for. Let's take this thing for a test drive. How does this work? So let's say that you want to cut an angle on something. So here I've just drawn an arbitrary angle on a piece. Typically this is going to happen if you're making legs for something that you want to taper, and more importantly, when you want to repeat the same angle on something, you can now set that angle on here and run multiple pieces on multiple sides to get a repeatable, consistent result. So how does it work? Well, like I said, you draw an angle on whatever it is that you want to cut, and now since we know that this edge here is exactly parallel to the blade, you simply line that angle up with your edge, and then you bring your fence to match the other edge of the piece, drop down your hold down clamps, tighten them up, and now this piece is ready to go. So let's give it a whirl. And just like that, you've got a perfectly cut angle to almost any size that you want. And it's that easy. So now you've got a great jig to last you the rest of, until you break it, I guess. I don't know, a month maybe? We'll see. All right guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time. Take care.